So today we are going to start discussion on Bayesian analysis of regression model, or how uh, Bayesian statistics approach to regression model. So, and as you know that regression model is one of the most favorite model or mostly used model. So effectively what happens is we have some target variable or dependent variable, say y, and we want to uh, predict y or estimate y given another quantity. We call it sometimes we call it independent variable, sometimes we call it feature variable, sometimes we call it predictor variables, depending on which community you're talking about, you're talking to. But given a x, I want to say something about y. So this is the precise statement of the regression. And what we do, we just say that, okay, if we can come up with, distribution of y, probability distribution of y given x, and of course some parameters beta. Model will have some unknown parameters beta. And we have some n observations in the data set, and we want to say something about, we want to model it. So a simple multiple linear regression model starts like this, that, okay, expected value of y, I can model it as a some beta 1 x1, beta 2 x2, beta k xk. So in this model, if you just take x1 equal to 1 for all I, then this part becomes basically what we call intercept part in statistics. In machine learning community, we call it bias. Okay, so in that way, it is a generic way of writing the model. So on the other hand, you can write it as yi is actually following a normal distribution with beta 1, beta 2 xi, x2i plus beta dot 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 beta k xki, comma, with a constant variation sigma square. Okay, so this is a simple ordinary multiple linear regression model that we talk about. So we can write it in a matrix notation, use the matrix notation to write yi, follow a normal with the mean as xi transpose beta and sigma square. So I can write beta as basically regression coefficient vector, which contains beta 1, beta 2, beta k, and xi transpose is the ith row of the my matrix, X matrix, feature matrix. So naturally, this is the dot product between xi transpose times beta. And that gives me the mean around which so that will be the expected value of y, around which the actual observed value of y will vary, and how much it will vary, that will determine by the sigma square. Now, standard frequencies or classical statistics, if we typically use ordinary least square estimates for beta. Beta is the unknown parameter. Sig beta and sigma square are the unknown parameters. And we use typically ordinary least square estimates. Turns out, ordinary least square estimates is also maximum likelihood estimates for beta. They're exactly same. And frequentist ordinary least square estimates is beta hat, which is x transpose x inverse x transpose y. So this is the solution that we have. Now, I am not going to discuss this because I have discussed this in our regression classification course. If you are not familiar with how to derive this estimator, write me separately. I will direct you to my lecture from the last semester. Okay, and we just have a look into that. I think the lecture is recorded and available on YouTube. So I will direct you to that link. frequentist estimate of sigma square, that you can use S square, which is basically y minus x beta, which is effectively error transpose the error itself. So that means sum of error square, and you divide that by the n minus k. So generally, normal sense is if you take, we should divide it by n, but typically we, in the frequentist method, they divide it by k, because what happens is this is the estimator which gives an unbiased estimator for sigma square. So A square is an unbiased estimator. This is an unbiased estimator for sigma square. So, and as you know that in the frequentist theory, there is quite a bit of stress on the unbiased estimators, and as a result, actually unbiased estimator, and that is why they zeroed on this estimator. One of the properties, important properties of this estimator is unbiased estimator. Another important thing is the sampling distribution of coefficient, regression coefficient is beta hat. It follows a k-variate normal distribution with mean beta, and covariance matrix is sigma square x transpose x inverse. Okay, and that is extremely important in the sense that if you want to do any kind of statistical inference in a frequentist width method, you need to have some sense of coefficient, some margin of error, and that margin of error we estimate through the beta, the sampling distribution of the estimator. So beta hat is my OLS estimator or maximum likelihood estimator, and the estimate, this is the sampling distribution. K-variate normal is the sampling distribution of the estimator beta hat. All right. So up to this, all of you are with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, if I have to introduce the Bayesian approach, the first thing we have to do is we have to introduce a prior, and because like what will be the likelihood? So this, if this we need a posterior distribution to do posterior distribution on the parameters. So what are my parameter space? Parameter space are the regression coefficient beta 1, beta 2 up to beta k, and sigma square. These are the k regression coefficient, and the sigma square is are the parameters which are unknown in the model, unknown parameters in the model. So we want to do statistical inference on these parameters. So what, Bayesian perspective, we need to develop this posterior distribution. So given the data, what is my data? My data, the data that I have only y and x, the y vector and the x matrix. That's all I have. So given y and x, I want to develop a posterior distribution of beta 1 to beta k and sigma square. That's what I want. So posterior distribution will be proportional to my likelihood times prior. Now here I purposefully wrote mu sub I. Mu sub I is basically this one. This is my mu sub I. Okay. So just to, if I write the entire thing again here, it will look very cumbersome. So just to avoid that, but effectively this is beta 1 plus beta 2x2i plus beta 3x3i dot that, multiple linear regression. But I'm just writing it as a mu sub I. So just, it will look little clean. So sigma square. So this product of this part is my likelihood. Okay. Product of I equal to 1 to n, P of yi given mu sub I sigma square. This product is my likelihood. Okay. And this P of beta 1 to beta k comma sigma square, this is going to be my prior. Now I have to choose first we are going to choose a non-informative flat prior. So what we can do, so the first thing basically what we can do is, so beta 1 to beta k, they are coefficients. Technically, they can take any value on the real line. Okay, so the support of these guys are beta 1 to beta k. Now, sigma square is a scale parameter. Its support is r plus.
Sir, what do you mean by support?
Support means what is the range, what is the domain where it can take values. So beta 1 can take any value between minus infinity to infinity. In that sense.
Okay, sir.
So beta 2 can take any value between minus infinity to infinity. Sigma square, this is a scale parameter. It has its own meaning. It's a sample variance or population variance. It can take only value between 0 to infinity. It cannot take a negative value. So that is what I'm talking about. So if I take log of sigma square, then I don't have to worry about the r plus. Now this beta, when I'm writing this beta is a vector of beta 1 to beta k. Okay, so probably I will do some notational hand juggling here, but anyway, beta 1 to beta k, and log of sigma square will be always between minus infinity to infinity. So that's not an issue. So then now entire thing is my on the r. But the problem is I don't want, so we know that P of beta and log sigma square non-informative flat prior will be 1. Okay, so we can write it as a P beta times P of log sigma square, and P of beta will be 1. P of log sigma square will be 1, but then it requires a Jacobian to do the adjustment. So if we put a Jacobian here, that will be the non-informative flat prior for the P beta 1 to beta k comma sigma square. So this 1 over sigma square is the non-informative flat prior that we can use for here P beta 1 to beta k to say and sigma square. This prior is a good choice for a statistical model when you have a lot of data points and only few parameters. If you have only 3-4 parameters or 10 parameters and you have samples of hundreds of samples, then this prior is very good choice for you. Okay, because the Bayesian solution from this non-informative flat prior will be equivalent to the OLS estimations or the maximum likelihood estimation, and it enjoys the advantage of direct Bayesian probabilistic statement. So there will be no confusion. Your analysis will be matching with standard classical statistical analysis, and you are going to make a direct Bayesian probabilistic statement. So that is the one of the major advantage that you are going to enjoy in this. Now, what will be the posterior distribution of sigma square in this case? Turns out that posterior distribution of sigma square given y and x turns out to be scaled inverse chi-square distribution with degrees of freedom n minus k and the location parameter s square. Okay, where s square is the sample covariance sample variance, that is this is the frequentist estimator s square. Exactly same thing. And from the joint posterior distribution from this, if this is the beta one from here, if you integrate out sigma square, so if you integrate out sigma d sigma, just take an integration, just do d sigma. If you integrate out sigma square, then what you will left with probability posterior distribution of beta given data. That turns out to be T distribution with degrees of freedom n minus k with location parameter beta hat a square x transpose x inverse. So this is like exactly same like, here this is the sampling distribution of beta hat. And now we do know that if you go there, actually here, this is your sampling distribution of beta hat, fine. But in this, if you don't know the value of sigma square. So what you do, you estimate the value of sigma square by the sample variance S square. If you do that, then that will give you actually this distribution. T n minus k, T distribution n minus k, and here it will be S square. Effectively, this is the distribution that you will get, right? So this is the distribution. So if sigma square, if you estimate sigma square by a sample variance, then it turns out to be beta hat, the sampling distribution of beta hat is T distribution n minus k degree with n minus k degrees of freedom, with location is beta, still beta, and this is the covariance matrix. Now this covariance matrix is completely estimable. Now let us look at the posterior, how the posterior distribution, marginal posterior distribution of beta turns out. Marginal posterior distribution turns out to be exactly T, same distribution n minus k. Location parameter turns out to be beta hat, and covariance matrix is exactly same. So these, it looks like it has just switched its position. So like, it has now become beta hat. And what marginal posterior distribution is saying that, look, I have no idea about the actual true value of the beta. What if I can say that it actually beta hat is the location era, and true value is maybe somewhere in that region close to the beta hat, and how close it is, the distance will depends on how the covariance matrix S square x transpose x inverse behaves. So beta hat behaves as an anchor, and beta, true value of beta is somewhere around the beta hat. It could be somewhere in that neighborhood. And how far it can go from the beta hat, the true value can be from the beta hat, will depend on S square x transpose x inverse. So it gives us a sense of like how far the true value is, that, or how far it can go, or how, in which neighborhood the true value is. That gives us a probabilistic statement based on a complete data driven estimation. Whereas if you look into the sampling distribution is saying a very different story. Sampling distribution is saying that if I repeat the experiment many times, which is not feasible, practical, neither practical nor pragmatic, but just imagine, do a thought experiment. Do a thought experiment. You are repeating the experiment many times. If you do that, you will, every time you get a data and you can estimate the beta hat. And that beta hat those beta hats will be in the surrounding neighborhood of the beta. And how far those beta hat can go will depend on the covariance matrix of the S square times x transpose x inverse. So it is telling a completely different story. So, however, their behavior is getting modeled by the same probabilistic distribution, T with n minus k. It is just the perspective is completely different. And that is the fascinating, mathematics that we are getting here. Any question so far?
So does it make any sense to assume a distribution? So S square is our estimated statistic. So like for as in proxy of sigma square. So since we are assuming distributions on beta, why aren't we assuming a distribution on sigma square in the frequentist?
No, we are not assuming. We are not assuming anything. In the Bayesian method, we have a likelihood and we have assumed a prior distribution on beta 1 to beta k sigma square.
Yeah, Bayesian I understood. I'm asking about a frequentist.
You're talking about frequentist,
yeah,
or the posterior, or the
no. I understood the Bayesian part, that there is a joint distribution on betas and sigma.
And you are integrating out the sigma square.
Yeah.
After integrating out the sigma square, your resulting distribution behaves like this. From the joint posterior distribution
for this betas,
this is your joint posterior distribution.
Yeah.
Okay, you plug all the, you write down the likelihood, you write p beta 1 to beta k sigma square, you just write 1 over sigma square, then you get this joint posterior distribution.
Yes.
Then from this you integrate out the sigma square, which will be a very cumbersome integration, but you can do it. People have done that. I mean, yes, they have gone. If you do that, the resulting solution turns out to be this posterior distribution of beta given data. That turns out to be T distribution with n minus k beta hat a squared x transpose x inverse. Okay. So this is what it is, like, it is a resulting distribution in that way. Frequentist method actually solves this problem in a very different way. So what they do is,
so that's the question, like
understood. Yeah. So you have to look into the actual derivation of how this beta hat was derived. So what they do is you have to, so first of all, so proving that beta hat follow k-variate normal is not a very difficult thing. So because you're starting, here is your starting point, right? So this is effectively, you can show, here it is a univariate normal xi beta sigma square. So if you think of it as a matrix notation, then your yi will be y1, y2, yn. Your means will be xi transpose beta, x1 transpose beta, x2 transpose beta to xn transpose beta. And sigma square will become a n by n covariance matrix whose diagonals are all sigma square and off diagonals are 0, because you are assuming these yi's are all conditionally independent. Given the xi's, they are all independent. So you can write it as y follow. So I can just using, you can write it in this way effectively. Here, I think here it is. You can effectively write y c.
Sir, I'll simplify my question. So the thing is, whenever we assume some distribution on whatever quantity, recursively, whatever parameters go into the distribution can also have distributions. So say yi follows normal beta something sigma square. So then those parameters can also have distributions, and at some point we'll have to draw a line where we say that this we'll be using empirically. So how do we choose where we stop?
No, in the frequent test.
Yeah, because we stop at S square here. So
No,
I
no,
guess
no.
that S square
No.
also has a distribution.
Yeah. A square has its own distribution. That is, I think, if I remember, that will be, I think, some chi-square distribution. I think scale inverse chi-square. I think chi-square distribution with n minus k degrees of freedom. Okay. So actual derivation, if you have to look into the actual derivation, but let me just give you the thought process how these results came up. So the thought process was, you can write these things in this way. So it is a y, your target variable y is a n dimension vector, which
Yes.
coming from n variate normal with the mean vector is x transpose beta, and covariance matrix is sigma square I. So that means diagonals are all sigma square, of diagonals are 0. You can write it in. So you're writing this thing as a matrix notation. Now look into this. X transpose X inverse X transpose, you can use it as a C, and then there is a basically that means this is CY, okay, and so that will turns out to be basically C times X transpose beta, and this will be C sigma square C of C transpose. So if you just plug those things and do the algebra, you can show in 3 lines that beta hat follow k variate normal beta sigma square X transpose X inverse. That okay, it will be 3 line proof. You can do that. You don't have to.
Oh yeah. Okay, understood.
Now problem here is still you cannot use this distribution because sigma square is unknown.
Yeah.
Correct. Then what to do?
Then trick, use distribution of S square, I guess.
Exactly. Now A square follow a chi-square, I think chi-square distribution with n minus k. So you plug it in here, and effectively you can basically that will be a k variate normal divided by a chi-square distribution with n minus k degrees of freedom. That kind of transformation, and it's a bit of a cumbersome derivation, but if you go through that, I think Anderson's book, it's a very old book which has the derivation. You can show that this beta hat followed T distribution with n minus k. Okay.
Yes, sir. I'll try to fill in the gaps myself when I'll ask besides the class.
I'll give you the reference book where you can see the derivation.
Yes, sir.
T.W. Anderson, 1984, second edition, multivariate statistics.
Yes, sir.
So, and also I think they are independent, right? Because
they are independent. That you can show using ancillary concept of something called ancillary statistics. Basically, they are orthogonal. You can show this thing and this thing is orthogonal to each other.
Yes, sir.
So that you can show in that way. So I think 3rd or 4th chapter has this derivation. Okay. So here is the reference. I think 3rd or 4th chapter, if I remember correctly. T.W. Anderson. Title is multivariate statistics. Multivariate statistics by T.W. Anderson, 1984, Wiley, 2nd edition. Most likely chapter 3 or chapter 4, that you just find it by yourself. Most likely, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah, sure. So, up to this, you guys are okay, right?
Yes, sir.
So naturally, yeah.
Sir, in the second point, you have written that the prior, like P beta comma log sigma square, it splits up, right? So how is that
Here,
happening?
yeah. Good question. So I'm not splitting. I'm just basically it's sort of I'm just assume that there is a independence, but if there is a dependence between these parameters beta and sigma squares, then posterior will pick it up as posterior will be structured by the data driven way. So in the prior, we can make whatever assumption we can, but we hope that posterior will pick it up, that structure, that if there is a correlation between these parameters, that posterior will.
Sir, does this rely on assuming that we choose a weak prior, or even for a strong prior, this holds?
No, of course, if the strong prior, if you choose a very strong prior for beta and sigma square, and you are choosing very strong the independence, then you need lot of data as usual, and it will try to impose that independence on your Bayesian analysis. But if it is a weak prior and you are assuming independence, then if you have a lot of data, then automatically this independence assumption will also washed out. And if there is a correlation that is getting manifested between the beta and sigma square, so your posterior analysis will pick that up.
No, but since we say uniform, that proportional shouldn't be a question, right? In uniform?
No. The question is, I'm writing it as a P of beta times P of log sigma square, right? How can I?
Yeah, so basically, how did we split it into the product?
Yeah, because that means underlying, I'm assuming some sort of independence between these parameters.
Yeah, but okay, right. Even a non-informative. Oh, yeah. By non-informative, I
non-informative just they're flat. Non-informative means I'm just saying they're flat. They're very big variance. They have a very, very large variance.
I thought non-informative included independence here.
No. It is only saying that they have a very large variance. But what about covariance?
Right.
Covariance is very different concept. Correlation is a very different concept. Correlation is coming from the covariance.
Yeah.
I'm saying when I'm saying
we only know about the diagonals. We don't know about the non-diagonals.
Exactly. Okay. It's a good question. Yeah. Any other question? No. Let's move on to conjugate prior and the Gaussian linear models. Okay. So I want to develop a Gaussian prior, conjugate prior. So this is what we want to build, that a prior distribution between beta naught, beta 1 to beta k and sigma square. If we can develop a conjugate prior, our life will be simpler because my posterior will be in the same family, and we can do all the things analytically. That is the advantage of being a conjugate prior. So turns out if you just do this trick, you can write this joint distribution in this way: beta naught, beta 1, beta k given sigma square times p sigma square. And then you can assume a k-variate normal on beta 1 to beta k given sigma square. I'll talk about how to assume this beta naught, lambda 0 and all these things. And sigma square, we assume inverse gamma A0, B0. So basically, I'm just assuming k-variate normal on the coefficients and inverse gamma. Inverse gamma has a full support from 0 to infinity. Okay, so it is defined on the positive side of the real line. And so that is a best thing we can have. Turns out this is actually a posterior of beta naught, beta 1, beta k is also k-variate normal given sigma square and data, and posterior of sigma square given data turns out to be again inverse gamma. But of course, the parameters will be different. Parameters will be updated. We have to do that updation. Now, posterior mean turns out to be expected value. So if this is the thing, then posterior distribution, and posterior distribution will be again, I can just, before doing the posterior distribution, so basically, if that is my conjugate prior, my posterior mean, posterior distribution. So now you can show that posterior distribution of beta naught to beta k and sigma square given data yx, you can show that beta naught beta k sigma square yx times p sigma square. And this posterior distribution, so this was my prior I began with, turns out to be, people have done that hard maths, that posterior distribution turns out to be k-variate normal with posterior mean is beta n and covariance matrix lambda n. So only thing is the parameters of the posterior distribution getting updated. Now what is posterior mean? That is beta n, which is, I'm writing it here as a beta given yx, expected value of beta given yx. Now x transpose x plus lambda not inverse of inverse x transpose x beta hat plus lambda 0 inverse beta 0. You can do the math a bit here, and effectively you can show that this is also like we did for the normal simple Gaussian model. We showed that, or Poisson-Gamma model, we showed that posterior mean was a weighted average between prior mean and the likelihood estimates. Remember that beta had also my likelihood estimates, and one can show that this case also posterior mean is weighted average of likelihood estimates and prior mean. Prior mean is my beta naught. Okay, and in fact, in my thesis, I showed that this you can show for any class or any distribution which belongs to class of generalized exponential family. You can show this result that posterior mean is the weighted average of prior mean and likelihood estimates. So that's a very interesting result. So that's what I have written here, that notice that coefficients are essentially weighted average of prior coefficients described by beta 0 and the standard OLS estimates. And depending on how much data you have, what is your sample size, you will see that as the sample size increases, you can do a simulation study. In fact, as the sample size increases, the effect of beta naught will gradually wash out. So that you can see. So now an interesting story I want to tell you. If you take beta naught equal to 0, okay, your prior mean as 0 and lambda naught inverse as simple lambda I. Lambda is any positive scalar value, okay? And you just plug it here. So this is 0, so this part is gone. And this is lambda I. Then effectively you can show this is x transpose x plus lambda I inverse x transpose y. If you remember from your regression classification course, this is actually Ridge solution.
Yes, sir.
Right? So Ridge solution of Ridge regression is a special case of Bayesian regression with conjugate prior.
Sir, Sir, wouldn't this be true for any sort of manipulation? But we might not have a closed form prior. I mean, set theoretically, we could always say that there is a prior that will lead to this and define that prior function as the function that leads to this. But we might not be able to get a closed form like nice thing that we got in this case.
Yeah. People have done that. So, for example, if you take double exponential prior or Laplace prior popularly, basically you can show that Laplace prior on the regression coefficient is nothing but L1 penalty. It's directly
exactly.
one-to-one L1 penalty.
Right.
In the if you use L1 penalty, you don't have a mathematically closed form solution.
Right.
Or if you use a double exponential prior, or which is L1 penalty and double exponential or Laplace prior is one-to-one mapping. You can show. Okay. It's a direct one-to-one mapping.
Okay. Yeah.
So basically, if you use Laplace prior, you don't have nice, posterior distribution here.
Yeah.
You have a very cumbersome posterior that you can write up to a proportion, like something like this. Okay.
So then we could
in that case also what people have done shown the mathematical properties like boundedness, sparsity, and other things like, when I'm saying sparsity, that means basically, what is sparsity? The property of sparsity in regression is you have beta 1 to beta k, these many coefficients, right?
Okay.
We do know not all the predictors are actually have any effect on y. There could be maybe, second and fourth predictor have no effect on y. So effectively, beta 2 and beta 4 is 0. If the x2 and x4 does not have an effect on y, I would prefer beta 2 to be 0 and beta 4 to be 0.
Yes.
Right? Now, L1 penalty or a Laplace prior has this interesting property. If a predictor or feature does not have an effect on target variable y, that it will make the coefficient forcefully goes to 0.
Right. I know about L1 penalty, but okay.
Now L1, so if L1 penalty has that property, then
Laplace prior has a one-to-one correspondence.
Because they are one-to-one, they are just one-to-one mapping. Okay. Now what happens is, so that is a very interesting property that we have. Very useful property, because I don't have to do a variable selection now. I can just use a Laplace prior or a L1 penalty, and whichever the features are useless, their betas will goes to 0, and automatic variable selection is happening in one shot.
Yes, sir.
You don't have to do any feature selection. So automatically it will happen. So this is automated variable selection, very clever way of doing it. Interestingly, L2 penalty and Gaussian prior, they have a one-to-one mapping.
Oh, okay.
This Gaussian prior and L2 penalty has one-to-one mapping. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, what you can do basically, and that is the reason, let me finish my point. And that is the reason, if you take beta 0 equal to 0 and lambda 0 equal to this specific lambda I, then what will happen? is your Bayesian solution turns out to be your Reed solution. Because Reed solution are derived under L2 penalty.
Yes.
So it is not like I just did some, manipulation and we came up with the same result. No, it's not. There is a complete, there is a rationale, and the rationale is if you take L2 penalty, actually, if you look into the original paper of Ridge regression in 1971 Technometrics paper, they solve it as a L2 penalty. They have taken the objective function, which is a least square method. They have taken a L2 penalty on the constraint as a constraint on the coefficients, and then they solved it as a constraint optimization, and they came up with this solution. Bayesians, on the other hand, they have taken Gaussian prior and did their Bayesian solution and come up with this solution. And then we realized, oh, wait a minute, L2 penalty and the Gaussian prior has a one-to-one mapping.
Right.
Okay. You take the PDF of Gaussian distribution, take the log, take the negative. So basically negative log of Gaussian distribution
Is it L2
will be L2.
Yeah.
Take the Laplace distribution, PDF of the Laplace distribution, take the log, take the negative. Result will be L1 penalty. So
right.
You can do
that log comes because of the posterior.
Posterior, exactly. So that means basically log posterior, and then you take the negative, you just get the exact same one-to-one mapping between restricted optimization of the regularization technique and the Bayesian technique. There is a exact one-to-one mapping. So can I leave it as an assignment?
Yes. So could you, although officially upload it?
I will do that. I will upload it in the thing. I also have to, do the. Okay, we are almost done.
There's just one question.
Say it again.
One question that even in the linear cases, these regression problems, we have like complicated prior distributions and posteriors. These neural networks have non-linear decision functions. So do we have any idea what sort of distributions they are modeling or what it is that they're doing?
To be honest, not yet. I don't have, this is a lot of mathematical properties needs to be understood more clearly. And it's not clear yet. From a statistical machine learning perspective, many things are not clear to me yet, particularly for the deep learning models. I'm studying these and some of the properties coming to my mind. But yeah, I honestly, that is, I think, a very, fertile land. Lot of mathematical properties needs to be studied in the deep learning models. But those things are not done yet. People have, doing all these things on a heuristic basis.
Right. Decision function, just like L2 came 30 years before and then came our understanding of.
Correct. Yeah. So people are doing it on a heuristic basis, but what is the rationale from a statistical machine learning, statistical decision theory point of view? Those things are not clear yet to us. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. So what I'm going to do, I have done this capital asset pricing model applications of regression in quantitative finance in the regression course. So I have given a basic intro to this model. If you want, I can give you the YouTube link maybe here for the intro, but I'm going to use the same thing once more to develop the Bayesian CAPM and give you how Bayesian regression works and then we will extend on top of that. Okay, so if you just, I have the data is available in my website. You can just take this data. It is a bit old data, but I think for the demonstration purpose, it will work just fine. So it is okay. It is initializing. Yeah, first time it will always decline. Okay, so here is the thing. So I have IBM volume adjusted close. It's 1 year of data basically, 2015, 1st January through I think 31st December. IBM volume adjusted close, Apple, Microsoft, and Intel, the S&P 500, and some US Treasury bills that is required for doing certain things, for calculating the risk premium. So I'll talk about it later, maybe. So we have n row is the sample size, the number of samples, the number of rows, that is what we have. There is, I have calculated something called risk-free rate, which is I have taken the 1 year treasury bills data and then divide that by the 250. And then here I have calculated the log return in percentage and then subtracted the risk-free rate. That is how we typically calculate the risk premium, what we call, that is important for the capital asset pricing model. So I did it for S&P 500, I did it for IBM, Apple, Microsoft, and Intel. So here I'm going to show you the thing for IBM, and you can repeat it for Apple, Microsoft, and Intel, and to check it out how the things are working on. Then I'm just assuming that my portfolio is consist of these 4 stocks: IBM, Apple, Microsoft, and Intel. And so I just took these returns and clubbed them into one matrix. So here I am just doing a plot in this line. I'm just doing a plot of S&P 500 return and IBM return, and then histogram of S&P 500 and IBM, or histogram of the IBM return. So the first thing is, yeah, sample size is 250. So there in a, I think in a one financial year, we will have about 250 days of business days. And then here on the x-axis, I'm plotting the log return of S&P 500. On the y-axis, I'm plotting the log return of IBM. Turns out this is one thing that actually, let me just, yeah. So almost, straight line behavior, we will always see, typically we tend to see at least between the big stocks and the market. And one reason is these big stocks are actually part of this index. So that is one of the reasons they behave in a sort of a straight line behavior. There are theories which they says that on the upper end they behave like a little bit different, and the lower end they behave like a, so basically they try to say in a bearish market they tend to behave different, and on the bullish market they, so, but just visualizing this, we can just think like, we can just simply model it with a simple straight line. So let's take that thing. Now, this is the log return of S&P 500. It is bell-shaped, but can it be normal? I don't know. We have to check it out. Okay. Similarly, this is the log return of IBM. Looks like bell-shaped, but whether it's a Gaussian or not, we don't know. So we have to cross-verify that. So I created a portfolio where just it's a like toy example, don't take it too seriously. So I'm just creating a portfolio with 20% weight on IBM, 30% weight on Apple, 25% of Microsoft, and 25% on Intel. So it's basically, if I have 100 rupees in my pocket or $100 in my pocket, $20 I will put in IBM, $30 I will put in Apple, $25 I will put in Microsoft, and $25 I will put in Intel. So this is the weight I have defined here. So now if you take this portfolio, this is, remember that as I saved it as a matrix and multiply it with the weights, then what we will get is the return of my portfolio. So I just did that. And then I just ran a simple analysis regression model. I fit like IBM as a function of S&P 500. So basically, the thing I want to model is RT of, say, IBM as a function of alpha plus beta times RT on the portfolio plus epsilon T, and we are just assuming this epsilon T. This is like brute force. We are not we are going to check these assumptions later, but for the time being, we just assume this is follow 0 sigma square. Okay. Now, if I just do that, then I can, it means basically I can also write, effectively it means I can also write RT follow normal with alpha times alpha plus beta times this comma sigma square. Okay. So this is very important. So this is exactly what we are writing in terms of our specific problem, but this is exactly the matching problem. If you go to the theory, this is exactly the thing we are talking about. YI follow normal sum multiple linear regression with the sigma square. So we are now trying to match it up with our problem with the theory that we discussed. Whether it is right or not, we will verify later, and but for the time being, if we can just do that. Now,
Sir, are the tests like whatever tests that we perform, like Fisher tests and all, are they same for both Bayesian and frequentist?
No. They are Fisher's is most of the, or the frequentist test.
Oh, okay. So we have different Bayesian tests. So
Testing of hypothesis in Bayesian is a very different ball game altogether. Okay, I'll come to Bayesian test is a very different thing.
Okay.
Because what happens in Bayesian statistics, in frequentist statistics, what happens, or the way of Fisher and Lehman, they developed, you have a null hypothesis and then you build alternative hypothesis. The world was defined in binary. World of hypothesis was defined in binary.
Yeah.
And then you are done. On the contrary, Bayesians took a very different approach. They took like, you can have multiple hypotheses.
A distribution thing.
Correct. So right. If you can have a multiple hypothesis, and each hypothesis have certain prior probabilities,
right.
And you'll observe the data, you do the update, and then you come up with the most likely probability of the hypothesis with highest probability.
Right.
And you choose that that hypothesis. So you can have a 3 hypothesis, and that actually makes sense because, for example, in this problem, if you look into this problem, this alpha has a very, the value of alpha has a very different meaning depending on which range of the real line it's saying. If alpha is 0, that means I will say IBM is fairly priced at this moment. If alpha is strictly greater than 0, that means I'll say IBM is underpriced. And alpha is strictly less than 0, then I'll say IBM is overpriced. So depending on alpha, I have 3 hypotheses. Either it is a underpriced, or it is a fairly priced, or it is a overpriced.
Yes.
Right? I can come up with some kind of probability for each of the hypotheses. Then we can look into the data, and then we can update our posterior probability of each of the hypotheses. And so, and each hypothesis will give me a separate model effectively. So it's a more like a model selection problem,
Right.
rather than a simple testing of hypothesis problem.
It becomes a good decision problem sort of a thing instead of a binary.
Exactly. Exactly. So in that way, I mean, Bayesian's hypothesis testing is a very different approach. Yeah.
I'm a little confused about why. So you have your independent variable is the portfolio. Should that have been S&P 500 in the LaTeX?
Say it again. Yeah.
So the independent.
Yeah. I'm just assuming my S&P 500 is independent variable. Yes.
But you written down portfolio. So are you saying the portfolio is mirroring the S&P 500? I don't understand. I thought we were regressing the IBM stock.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying. Sorry. Yes. Extremely sorry. It should be S&P 500. Yeah, thanks. It's a mistake. S&P 500. You are correct. Sorry, it was my mistake. My bad. Yeah, perfect. Correct. Yes, it is. And that is what we are doing here. Yeah. So I'm building my dependent variable is IBM, the log return of IBM, and the independent variable is S&P 500. And basically, we are benchmarking IBM with respect to the market. With respect to the market, if IBM is underpriced or overpriced, that is what we are trying to figuring it out. Okay. So if I run this thing, then according to the frequentist method or likelihood estimate method, my alpha is negative 0.04 and beta is 1.01. And this is the standard error. This is a t-value. And the p-value is 0.38. So I can think of a null hypothesis is alpha equal to 0 and beta alternative is alpha non-zero. And then p-value is too large, so we cannot reject null hypothesis. So we can say alpha is IBM is fairly priced. Okay, so this will be my inference. So if I use a non-informative improper prior, we should be end up on the same kind of conclusion. Okay, only thing will be, we will be able to say exactly what is the confidence interval and all this Bayesian probabilistic statement we will be able to make. Let me, what time it is? 1:10. Let me stop here. I will, let me stop here and I'll continue this in the next session.